Hello, everyone, and welcome to Holocaust Remembrance Around the World, a new series featuring guests from all over the world, people whose work shapes and reshapes Holocaust education and remembrance, people who place the past in a local, current, and relevant context. My name is Dr. Shai Pilnik. I'm the director of the Emil and Jenny Fish Holocaust and Genocide Studies Center at Yeshiva University. In this program, we travel all over the world, looking usually for unusual places where we meet both professionals and lay leaders who do quite amazing things in the field of Holocaust remembrance and education. Today, we're actually going to stay in our home base. We're actually going to travel to Israel. And in Israel, in a country where we could definitely explore the great museums, the great research centers, we wanted to talk about an initiative of one woman, an exciting and new initiative where we see a great deal of innovation, creativity, long-term thinking. I'm so proud and excited to introduce you to our guest today, Alicia Kaylie Yacoby, who is the founder of our 6 Million. Alicia, welcome to our program.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
So Alicia, we're going to talk today about, when we think about Holocaust remembrance in Israel, we normally go back to its institutionalization, the legislation of the law that led to the inauguration of Yad Vashem. You can tell, perhaps you can tell, or our guests can tell by my accent, that I was not born in northern Nebraska. As I like to say, I'm Israeli, born and raised myself, and I remember that my Holocaust education came from home and then from high school, from middle school, from the Israeli, with programs brought to me and my classmates by the Israeli Ministry of Education. So it's pretty unusual to meet somebody who made a lasting contribution to that entire apparatus of Holocaust remembrance and education in Israel, and really did it, and it all came about as the initiative of one woman. I'm curious, tell us a little bit about what is our 6 Millions and how it started.
So our 6 Million has the goal of remembering individuals who perished in the Holocaust. To remember them, we light a candle, a standard yahrzeit memorial candle. And on the candle, it has information, a glimpse into that individual's life. They happen to perish. So it looks something like, there's a glare. Okay, so you can see that this candle, for example, is in memory of Benjamin Fontaine, and it offers a glimpse into his life. And on every eve of Holocaust Remembrance Day, we light a candle at home with family and friends to commemorate a specific individual who had a life and perished in the Holocaust.
And this is a concept that comes about when? How was that concept born?
So I actually went for coffee with a friend.
Really?
And lo and behold, she had an idea that everyone, all the Jewish nation or the Israeli nation, should light a standard memorial candle on Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I said that that's great and it's important, but how do you know what 6 million people are? I can't relate to 6 million people. It's very challenging. But if you zero in and you focus on a specific individual, then the person lighting the candle is better able to relate with and to understand the enormity of the atrocity by actually focusing on one specific individual. So for example, this candle, Benjamin Fontaine, he was the son of Isaac and Adela. He was a poet, critic, and philosopher. He was born in 1898 and perished in 1944. And he was from Moldavia originally. And he perished in Auschwitz. So just having a glimpse into Benjamin's life, I believe it enables us to better understand the perished. that they were people.
There's so many activities that Holocaust educators bring to the classroom, like bringing a bag of rice and asking the students to count the rice. There is actually a book that has the word Jew printed 6 million times. And it seems like the goal of the vision of your organization, which was born in a coffee shop, essentially, is to highlight the one multiplied by 6 million, rather than this abstract number 6 million. Is that a good representation?
Absolutely, exactly. And I would add that the real objective is twofold. One is for the person lighting the candle to be able to relate to the person who perished. But like a coin, I believe there's two sides. The second side is the person who perished. Now, if you go into their headset for a moment, they might not have known that there would be any Jews left after the war. And they likely didn't expect anyone to remember them specifically years later. And that in Israel, all the school children from 3rd to 12th grade light a candle in memory of them and their friends and their family. I think it's, in some aspect, it returns some of the dignity to them that the Nazis tried to rob from them.
I see. Let's turn to a short video segment that can, I think, illustrate what our 6 million does.
רבים שהיו שם כבר אינם בינינו. המעטים שנשארו לא יחיו איתנו לעד. ואנחנו הבטחנו לזכור ולא לשכוח. מאות האלפים שהצטרפו בשנים האחרונות למסורת של עמותת שם ונר, מדליקים נרות זיכרון אישיים בערב יום הזיכרון לשואה ולגבורה. על כל אחד מהם שם וסיפור של אדם שנספה. הצטרפו גם אתם למסורת. היכנסו לאתר עמותת שם ונר. בדקו היכן תוכלו גם אתם להשיג נר זיכרון אישי. אם תרצו, הוסיפו שם של קרוב שנספה, או פשוט בחרו שם שכבר מופיע במאגר. הדפיסו תווית, הצמידו לנר הזיכרון, והדליקו אותו בערב יום הזיכרון לשואה ולגבורה. נרות שם ונר, כי לכל איש היה שם, ולכל איש נדליק נר.
This is powerful. So, Alicia, you were quoted saying that a Holocaust victim who is remembered each year by name becomes immortal. Maybe you could elaborate for us on what exactly you mean when you turn these people into these dead, those Jews who were murdered during the Holocaust, and when I carefully select my words, become immortal.
So they had a life. And typically, the 6 million are referred to as perished. They're not even referred to typically as individuals. So by focusing on the life that they led and their accomplishments, the family, they were part of a community, they had a profession, they had lives, they had achievements. By focusing on that, I believe that we're returning their dignity to them and making them eternal for what they achieved, rather than focusing on the horrible atrocity that they were killed. Because if we just focus on them as someone who was killed, then it's a sad story. But if you look at them as people with accomplishments, then I think the Nazis stripped them of their names, they were numbers. They stripped them of their clothes. They had the prison clothes that they had to wear. They shaved their hair off. They dehumanized them. But when we focus on them as people who had lives and accomplishments and achievements, then we're returning to them who they were. And then they actually become immortal in the sense that their achievements live on past their death.
So what you actually do is, in a way, undoing the work of Adolf Hitler and his henchmen. if they
Well,
wanted to completely erase.
I don't know that we can undo that, unfortunately, but I would say that we're shifting the focus from the horrible deaths of the crematoriums and the shootings and the starvation. We're shifting the focus from the atrocities to the full lives that they were leading.
Right. We do not undo the crime, but if the intent was that these people will be completely forgotten, we make sure that that plan will be undone.
And
Um,
forgotten individually, not as 6 million.
Let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of it. So you already have a database with over 250,000 names. And essentially every candle has, these are like candle glasses, right? That have a label. From what I understand, you don't necessarily need to contact our 6 million and ask for a candle, but rather for a label that you can print on any memorial candle you can buy at the store, both here in America, at any kosher store at least, and in Israel, essentially everywhere. So tell us a little bit about how this works.
So the candle is actually a tin candle. It's not we prefer not to use glass only because it's so fragile. And in Israel, the candles and also in about 100 schools in the United States or North America, the candles are distributed to school children. So we prefer not to use glass, but at home, of course, you can use whatever you want. You don't even have to contact us in order to light a candle. You could simply go onto our website, our 6 million, and you can select someone that you would like to remember. So if you want to remember someone who is from a certain town or had a certain profession, you can search by different filters and light for them. And like in our family, we light for my husband's family who perished. And we also light for someone randomly that we have no direct connection with. And you can also order candles through COJUS, the Consortium of Jewish Day Schools. It's on the website. If you wanted like a higher quantity order. But if you just want for home use, you can go onto the website at home, print a label, and simply attach it onto a standard memorial candle. So it's very accessible, and it's also what's nice is that it's inexpensive.
And I see that I'm thinking database Israel. So my mind would first go to Yad Vashem and the mission of Yad Vashem and the collection of names. Is the 250,000 names? How do we get to that very impressive number? I suppose that some people can just share the name of a relative who perished in the Holocaust, right? But did you also tap into databases?
So we have volunteers who search for names, and many users send us their family and relatives who perished and add them to our database. And we use like Wikipedia or Yad Vashem or museums. We take information from those websites and we share that information on the candles. So the database, because of Yad Vashem, that's their mission, is actually to have the database. So most of the names and the data is actually from Yad Vashem, but we also have other reputable, that was the word I was looking for, other reputable websites that we use for our data. And it's work in progress. We started the first year with 72 names, and now we have over 300,000 and continuing to grow every year.
Let's say, I know we talked about yourself, about the idea, how this idea came to be at a coffee shop through a conversation with a friend. I want to know more about your background. I would like our audience to know. You seem like the model American Jew. I don't know if this is you would agree with what I hope is a compliment. You moved to Israel right before college, right before college. You made Aliyah. You have 6 children. You're married to an Israeli. I actually had a chance to meet you and your husband and your son when I was in Israel earlier in the summer. You are also very involved with Jewish community affairs. So tell us a little bit about how you harness your volunteer energy, particularly into this venture. Another one. From the little research I've done, and going back to our past conversations, your parents were not Holocaust survivors, right?
Correct.
So where is the hook?
I think actually because my family, actually my grandparents from my mother's side were both born in Berlin, but they left Germany for financial reasons. They came to the land of opportunity, to New York. And I'm sure that their family perished, but we have no inkling as to who they were, and it was never discussed at home. My father is second generation American, so they weren't in the Holocaust. So I grew up with a Holocaust education at school, in the community, at the shul, at home, but there was never anyone in our family that I knew of who perished. So I grew up in Brooklyn. I went to the Yeshiva Flatbush High School. My family is what we call conservadox. And after graduating high school, I moved to Jerusalem and graduated from Hebrew University. And my Holocaust education was basically horrible films, seeing naked women and men trying to survive, and especially if you're in high school, seeing people try cover themselves is very sad and horrible. And I think that today's generation isn't so prepared to handle that. I think that they're more the easygoing generation who doesn't really want to touch the atrocities. And I think also the distance of the years passing since the Holocaust, we've become more removed. It's not as fresh as it was in the past. It's not as raw. So I think that we've come to a stage now, and if you look at it from a timeline, if you zoom out, then I think that the time now is that we know that there were atrocities and horrors and crematoriums and the showers, but does that still need to be the focus? Or should the focus be that they were actually people who lived lives that were very similar to ours? So it's a process, and a process that I've gone through myself. When I started this, I wasn't in tune as much to the depth that I am today. But I realized that there were people no different from you or me. And it's kind of like a light bulb moment where, hey, this could happen to us, God forbid. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the crust of what Holocaust Remembrance is about. It's to remember the past, but for the future, it's to prevent such an atrocity from reoccurring. It's not enough to remember. You need to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
So many Holocaust organizations are focused on prevention. It seems to me from what you are describing that you believe that prevention depends to a great extent on the Jewish response to the Holocaust, on the Jewish awareness, that the primary goal of this project is actually to create a new tradition, integrate a new custom to Jews in Israel and to Jewish communities. Would that be a good representation?
Yes, I absolutely. I think it's important, like I said, to remember the people who perished, but it's also important for the future. And the future is, anti-Semitism today, unfortunately, is growing.
Mhm.
It's growing.
Do you feel the Jews are not aware enough, not sufficiently aware of its growth, of the fact that maybe they can find themselves in the shoes of the Holocaust victims down the road?
I can't answer that, but I can tell you that I believe in rituals. And when you do something, especially with your children, year after year, it's taken for granted that that's what it is. So if you are used to remembering someone who perished every year, once a year, then you grow up and you know that can happen. It becomes built in. It's not something that you need to go to a museum to learn about. It's no different than, in my opinion, from lighting a menorah on Hanukkah, or reading a Haggadah on Passover, or having a Seder on Passover. It's the rituals, and it keeps the story alive, and it helps it move forward. I don't know. I don't know about, how people really feel about anti-Semitism today, and where it could, God forbid, lead to.
And I suppose that the fact that you are speaking to me from Israel, from Ramat HaSharon, and that you have both the growing up in Brooklyn, New York, the New York Jewish perspective and the Israeli one, does that feature in your philosophy about Holocaust education?
Holocaust education in Israel is historical, and it's also, there's the journey to Poland that most high school students go on.
I certainly agree, as an Israeli who was reared in the system.
Unfortunately, I never had that opportunity to experience the journey to Poland. But if you think about it, do we need to go to the pyramids in Egypt to understand Passover?
Wow, what a powerful statement.
So I think you can bring the candle, the memory home, and it's just part of who we are. It's part of our DNA. It's where we came from. And truthfully, what's mind-boggling from my experience is the number of stories of people who have lit candles, and they randomly, I mean, statistically, it's impossible, they receive their grandparents' names. And I mean, statistically, that can't happen. There's something about the Jewish nation, I never realized how small it actually is until I receive emails and phone calls that I got my grandfather's candle. We even had a student who refused to hear about the Holocaust. His grandfather is a survivor and an artist, and his whole art is about the Holocaust. And the grandson just didn't want to hear anything about it. And at school, they were giving out the candles, and the grandson refused to accept it. And then the teacher said, just take it home and you'll decide at home. And it turned out that he had no idea. It was his great-grandmother.
That's unbelievable. His
And
actual
all of a sudden, it opened up his eyes as to the Holocaust, and it connected him with his grandfather and to what his grandfather was trying to relate to everybody through his art.
I can share with you a lot of conversations with American Jews who used to say to me, everything you're doing is great, but just, I have no connection to the Holocaust. My parents moved here right after my grandparents moved here, or great-grandparents, right after the pogroms in Russia, and they sometimes are unaware of their own loss of second cousins or third cousins and members of their family, and also unaware of the fact that they could have been in that place had their ancestors not moved to the Lower East Side half a century earlier. I think so far we've learned so much about our 6 million. To me, what I think intrigued me so much was that this is a project. It has a very basic concept, but it's really based on so much thinking and on an entire pedagogical philosophy, thinking about rituals, which I think is very unusual in Holocaust education. The thought about how would the Holocaust be remembered in decades, which I think most Holocaust centers are unaware of, and they never pay attention to these questions. So look at how much came out of that coffee shop meeting that you had. And also the question about your own role as a Jew, your own connection to those who died, how past and the future connect. This is so powerful. I would like now to take just a quick methodological break from our conversation and show our audience another video featuring Holocaust survivors, which I have to say is primarily not what our 6 million does, and I want to talk about it. So let's now watch the second segment.
מצבנו אז היה טוב מאוד. החיים היו באמת משהו.
היה לי חיים מאוד טובים. למדתי בית ספר פרטי, ובגיל 10 כבר הייתה לי אהבה.
סבא וסבתא גידלו אותי. סבא היה חזן, הוא דאג לתפילות, לבית כנסת שלו.
היהודים היו הולכים כל שבת לבית הכנסת ושומרים את הכשרות ואת היהדות.
אמא ואבא היו הולכים למועדון בערב לרקוד.
אתה לא תאמין איזה פינוקים היו. למה אני מספרת את הפינוקים האלה? כי אחר כך היה לי ההפך הגמור.
והלכנו לאיזה מרתף, לא היו מקלטים כמו פה. היה חלון למעלה, ככה צר וארוך. אחרי שקט פתאום שומעים את הרעש של מגפיים.
ילד שכל כך מפונק, לא נפרד אף פעם מאמא, ופתאום פחד נוראי תקף אותי.
אני התנשקתי עם אבא, בכיתי, גברים לחוד ונשים לחוד, והפרידו אותו.
סבא וסבתא התחילו להתחנן. אל תיגעו בילדים, תשאירו לנו את הילדים.
איזה איש מבוגר אמר לי, תירגעי ילדה, פה כבר לא בוכים יותר.
נאג'י.
אני נותנת להם יותר דגש, יותר תשומת לב, יותר רגשי, יותר מכוון לאותו אדם, אם אני מדליקה נר עם השם. זה בלב הרבה יותר חזק.
כשמדברים על 6 מיליון, זה מאוד קשה לקלוט, לדמיין. אם יש נר עם שם של מישהו, אולי יהיה יותר קל להבין ולהרגיש מה שקרה בשואה.
This is so well done. At the beginning, this looks like a collection of testimonies from the Shoah Foundation, collection of over 50,000 Holocaust survivor testimonials, but then you realize it's actually not. So tell us a little bit about these survivors. And then I would like to ask you, in what way your project differs from Holocaust organizations, Holocaust educational organizations and museums who are focused about recording survivors, playing to students, showing to students the testimonies of deceased survivors and encouraging their descendants, the second generation, 2G, 3G, to share these stories. So let's start with these survivors, who exactly they are.
So let's be honest. Unfortunately, the survivors are aging and they're not going to be here forever. If we rely solely on the testimony of the survivors in order to remember the Holocaust in 10 years from now, in my opinion, it'll be more challenging for younger people to relate with because they'll feel a disconnect. Especially young people, they think that 70, 80 years ago was dinosaurs. For them, history is history. Mm-hmm. It's not even their grandparents, their great-grandparents. It's something has nothing really to do with them, just like dinosaurs. These particular survivors, especially Sonia, who she's an extremely positive woman, and she doesn't cry. She's happy. She decided that she survived, and she's going to live her life most positively. When she lit the candle in memory of her sister, she got very emotional, which is not routine for her. Unfortunately, she passed away a few weeks ago. The survivors are not staying, and the narrative of the survivors is extremely powerful and very important. And I say it with utmost respect. But the other side of that is that they survived.
Mhm.
They built families, they moved on, they continued with their life. But what about the perished who didn't?
Mhm.
There's been really no focus on them as people. The focus, from what I've seen, has been really on the survivors and telling their story, which is very powerful and important. But in 10, 20, 30, 500 years from now, will that be sufficient?
Mhm. It's such a delicate balance. On the one hand, you talked about trying to avoid the crematoria and the images of the emaciated bodies and the corpses, and endowing the memory with something positive, celebrating the lives they had. At the same time, I agree with you that when the focus is on testimonies of survivors, it sounds students who are not really familiar with the details of the Holocaust, like most students, that there was a fairly high chance of survival. Look at all these people who survived. I will also share with you that when the second generation do the sacred work of sharing the stories of their deceased parents, the story I would say maybe inadvertently, maybe deliberately has a happy end. The happy end is I am a corporate lawyer, I have a business, I'm a physician, and I'm the son of survivors, and I have now 3 kids, and I have 2 grandchildren, and there is a moment, an uplifting moment of celebration of life, whereas those who died in a way become sidelined. So do you feel that your project adds another dimension to Holocaust education?
Absolutely.
Do you have
The
any reports from
stories,
students about it? Do you have any have you had conversations or had any other methods of receiving feedback from students about what they've learned about how this project has transformed them?
yes,
We talked before about the student whose great grandmother was featured on a candle.
yes. Not only children though. I could tell you the first year that we had a pilot program, we had 60 names in Hebrew and 12 in English. I sent a dozen candles in English to a friend in Jerusalem. And she said when she opened the box and pulled out the candle, she almost fainted. She knew him. He would come to study with her father every week for Chavruta. But I'm thinking 500 years from now, when people look at the filming of the survivors, especially for young people, I think it will be challenging for them to relate to what they're discussing and what they're talking about. I'm not saying that anyone should belittle the atrocities that happened. On the contrary.
Of course.
But I think that it is appropriate to direct the narrative to the full lives that these people had. And then in that respect, you're able to say, hey, you know what? They were like me. It's a light bulb moment.
Very powerful. Alicia, we're inviting now our audience to join us with questions. I want to now switch our attention from the past to the present and the future. First of all, how do I get involved? If I would like to, thinking about my own great-grandparents who perished in the Holocaust, even my mother never got a chance to meet. How do I go about and create a label for them, a memorial candle and label?
So it's really very simple. You go onto our website, our 6 million, and there's a program to add a person to our database of names remembered, and you enter the information. We really ask that you include the link of their, if there is one, of a page of testimony at Yad Vashem, so that this way we have the corresponding information, because we do check every name. It's very simple. You add it, and the big deal is, and what Sonia was from the film was so impressed about, is that she said that after she'll no longer be here, her family will still be remembered.
Mhm.
So,
How do we tell us a little bit about your future plans, the organization's future plans? I saw that your website includes lesson plans for children as young as first grade. If you could describe your resources just a little bit.
right.
And I know you also have photos to show. I don't know if our coordinator Hodaya has them. So tell us a little bit about the resources.
So as far as successes, if you could call it that, a highlight for me was when Mrs. Pence, who was the second lady at the time, Vice President Pence's wife, I had the privilege of her awarding me with an award for the work I've been doing on our 6 million. But what was a highlight for me, even more than that, was that she wasn't scheduled to speak. She was scheduled to just present the award. And I needed to speak after Rabbi Israel Meir Lau, who was the chief rabbi of Israel. And nobody wants to speak after him. He's an amazing orator. But she was so moved by what I said that she actually got up and spoke to me and gave me a hug. And the reason she was so moved is because I Googled her, and she is an artist and an educator. And she was looking into art therapy at the time. And so the candle I presented her with was in memory of Friedel Dicker Brandeis, who is an artist and an educator, similar to Mrs. Pence. She was at Theresienstadt camp, and she used art therapy with the children at the camp. In fact, one of the children who survived even said that her time with Friedel Dicker Brandeis was of her best memories, because she was loved, and Friedel had a way of bringing them out of the camp into a beautiful environment. And Mrs. Pence, it turned out, after I was told that on the way to the ceremony in the van, she asked if anybody knew if art therapy was used in the Holocaust. So she was touched by Friedel, and she got a bit emotional, and it was a great moment. It's those moments that are that gives us the fuel to keep going every year.
Right.
There are a lot of stories. There was a girl named Nati who was 3 years old when she was put into an institute. She had Down syndrome, and the family knew nothing about her. They knew about the other siblings, but not about Nati, because the family felt so horrible they never mentioned her. At some point, the family decided to mention her, and 2 years later, the family got her candle. It's, it's just, I look at it as our job is to continue doing what we're doing, to grow, to increase our database substantially.
What
we
about educational resources?
We provide more educational resources for schools, both in Hebrew and in English. I think that's the American part of me, that everything we do in Hebrew is also done in English. We have interactive material for children, school children, to use together with their teachers, and it talks about specific people in the Holocaust and what they went through, their life before, during, after, and the family members who didn't survive, and lighting a candle in memory of them. And the big thing is that it's not a gimmick. It's a custom that's meant to be done every year. So the goal really is for more people to light each year and every year. When I started the project, my father asked me what I would consider success. And we had 1,500 candles at the time. So I said 1 million candles. And now the goal is for the entire Jewish nation to light a candle every Yom HaShoah at home with their family, with their friends. And not just now. And you mentioned 10, 20 years from now. I modestly say that I'm expecting this to continue for even 500 years from now, because it's simple and it's very Jewish.
It's simple, it's brilliant, it's so thoughtful. What a great way to conclude our conversation. And it's also propelled by a visionary and entrepreneur, somebody who brings to the table the entrepreneurial spirit. Always being right unhappy about the immediate goal once we achieve it, and looking further and further. So from 1,500 to 1 million, it's so impressive. Of course, the Fish Center, our students, our audience are so happy to get to know our 6 million and you, and support your project. And I know that we have already been working together and hoping to expand, right? To expand the activities beyond Israel. You mentioned before the COJES, the Consortium of Jewish Day Schools, but also looking into integrating candle lighting to Jewish communities around the world. So thank you. I have actually a question from one member of our audience. If your program, our 6 million, is really requesting current generations to adopt a relative, quote unquote. This brings the Holocaust in a personal way onto young people's homes. In what ways have you reached out to organizations around the world who can show your work, like Jewish genealogy, or American religious groups like Reform or conservative synagogues, Hillels, etc.? Have you gone in that direction?
So we've been focusing, it's a great question. We've been focusing on schools. We find that with children, it's very powerful, because then they bring it home and it gets to the whole family. It's actually much easier in Israel, because you have pretty much a monopoly, and you have the infrastructure for everyone to receive it. We've been having challenges in North America, because we haven't been able to find the right umbrella organizations yet. We search to partner with many organizations. We're constantly finding new ways and trying new ideas. It's a slow process, but we, like for example, with UJA, or I forget what they're called now, JFN something. So we can get some communities, but then you don't get the other communities. We work with different synagogues. We work with, but it's hard to get that umbrella, those umbrella organizations that have a far reach. But we try every year. We We have partnerships not only with COGIS, but with the Afikim Foundation. And it's a process, not simple.
Alicia Kaylie, I'm sure it's not simple. Thank you so much for initiating the process, for letting us be a part of it, for letting us present it to our audience. I wanted to thank you for a great conversation, and hopefully we will continue to collaborate on future projects. It's an honor and a pleasure. Such an inspiring and thoughtful project, R6 Millions. I also wanted to thank the coordinator of the Fish Center, Hodaya Blau, and the producer of our show, Holocaust Remembrance Around the World, Lois Roman.
Our primary mission at the Fish Center at Yeshiva University is bestowing a master's degree for students interested in Holocaust and genocide studies. We have a short video clip about that now.
If there's truth to the saying that history repeats itself, then Holocaust remembrance and the study of genocide is not only a vital part of history, but also a crucial warning for the future.
Confronting Holocaust deniers and distorters is one of the most important tasks of our generation.
The Fish Center at Yeshiva University was founded with this mission of preserving the history of the Holocaust as well as more recent genocides. Our master's program offers a unique investigation of the Holocaust of European Jewry, with an interdisciplinary approach through the lenses of law, social work, history, theology, education, literature, and political science. If this sounds like a path you would like to pursue, apply now or learn more. I'd like to extend an invitation for you to join us and become a member of our growing community of scholars and educators.
Thank you to all of our community partners, the Holocaust and Human Rights Center in White Plains, New York, the Center for Holocaust Education in the East Valley JCC in Arizona, 3GNY, the Florida Holocaust Museum, the Rabbi Arthur Schneier Program for International Affairs at Yeshiva University, Shadowlight in Canada, Manhattan College, the Sosua 75 in the Dominican Republic, the Holocaust Memorial and Museum in San Antonio, Texas, Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Studies Center in South Africa, 2 different programs at the University of Miami, the Holocaust and Education Center in Fukuyama, Japan, the Illinois Holocaust Museum in Skokie, the Sister Rose Thiering Fund in Education for Jewish and Christian Studies, the Lake District Holocaust Project in the UK, Jewish Gen, and the Maltz Museum in Cleveland, Ohio.
Thank you for being with us, and I hope you join us to our next program, our next episode on October 31st. We're going to do it live. We can't do it at 12 p.m. because our guest is going to be Susan Hempel, who is one of the leaders of the Melbourne Holocaust Center in Australia. We will talk about the new Holocaust Center in Melbourne, Australia. So we will meet with her on October 31st at 7 p.m. Alicia, again, thank you so much. I wish you Shana Tova, Chag Sukkot Sameach, and I wish our audience Shana Tova and Chag Sukkot Sameach, and hopefully we will reconnect and see each other in about a month from now. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.